Seth, happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you as always. How are you doing, Scott?
Dude, I'm doing great, man. I went out to my first kind of jaunt to Silver Lake in Los Angeles, and I saw my first kind of live movie set. I was having dinner on Silver Lake Boulevard, and they were filming a movie. So I felt like it was a very LA moment.
I was gonna say, take it in what you can. At the moment, there may be with the strike, who knows how long it'll be until you see live things being shot around you. So take it in.
That's right, man. They were the scrubs. What do you call this? Like getting her, the non-union, but
The B squad, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it was pretty good, man. But no, all is well. It's I'm excited for today's topic because uh sometimes here in Los Angeles, and I imagine Chicago, you feel so much tension, right? There's this the post-COVID tension in the streets, people fighting. It can get kind of riley here. So today's topic is all about the diss song, which is fascinating.
Absolutely, a
Uh,
long and rich history across multiple genres. I think this is one that is associated oftentimes with hip hop, not unfairly.
yeah,
But I think when we're going to dig into it a bit, this actually spans time, genre, gender. There's a lot of different folks airing their grievances in song, and so excited to
yeah,
dive into this one.
yeah, you're right. And everyone feels pissed off. So it's not, hip hop has obviously a long tradition of these songs, the diss track, as they call it, but everyone gets pissed at someone all the time. So I think, as you said, it's everywhere in places you never thought you'd expect. And especially with the biggest bands in the world, if we want to lead with that one.
It's funny now too. It's we will lead that, but it's funny. I was just thinking about this, and I'm curious your thoughts, Scott. So like, I don't want to say there's less diss songs now, but I think what are your thoughts on with social media? Your diss can be more direct. People are getting into feuds
Yeah.
on Twitter, on Instagram, and there's sort of like that creative energy and that frustration is taken out elsewhere and maybe manifests itself in a full song, maybe
Yeah.
less than it used to. Like this was for a while, I think the only creative avenue that someone could publicly come out and make their feelings known about another person. Now you can do that anywhere all the time. And so I wonder how that has changed the delivery of the diss track.
Yeah, it's a good point. If you think about some of the earlier hip hop diss tracks, there was no Twitter. So
Yeah.
in this case, I could make a song, or I'm just going to go on Twitter and just
Yeah.
say F you. Boom, it's out and everyone's on it. So
Yep.
it actually is a much more efficient way to join the fun, right? And all politicians are doing, everyone's doing it. So there are still diss tracks, as we're going to go into, but it doesn't seem to have the punch as it used to. That, oh my God, did you hear this track from Tupac? Now it's like, who isn't dissing someone? That's
Exactly.
more of the question.
Everybody's dissing all the time and they can do it
Yeah,
in a much more timely manner. But there was a time, which we'll jump into back in the
yeah,
early 70s, where we're going to start off that this was kind of the best and most direct way to get your message out there
yeah,
about how you felt about a frenemy or a rival or whatever it may be. And we'll start from I don't want to say the beginning because
yeah.
who knows, they might have been writing diss symphonies in the 1700s. It's hard to say. I know, these things of insult battles have gone on forever, but the one that many people regard as sort of the first diss track is John Lennon's "How Do You Sleep." So this came out at the height of the post Beatles legal battle, basically between George, John, and Ringo, and then Paul. Those are sort of the two warring parties over music rights. One side with Alan Klein, one side not. And I think the frustration was really at a fever pitch after the album Ram came out, McCartney's album, which they felt there were some barbs on, including on the back cover, with one Beatle literally fucking another Beatle. But but Lennon's solo song, which George actually played guitar on, called "How Do You Sleep," is a pretty direct shot at Paul McCartney. I wonder now, or I wonder even if 5 years later, that Lennon maybe would have regretted that, but he was not one to pull punches in the press at the time, which is also, I think, why he's been nominated as one of the people that were probably the nuttiest Twitter follower
Oh
today.
yeah. Oh, for sure.
But this song was that outlet for him. So do you have any, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think it was merited? Do you think it was effective? What's your take on on How Do You Sleep?
I found it fascinating. I actually saw this in junior high, I think way back when, on the Imagine film that Yoko had, I think, funded or produced. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my God, he's talking about John, Paul, right? It wasn't, hey, Paul McCartney, let me tell you about, but when he said the only thing you had was yesterday, and you could feel his anger. It's almost like watching a fight. You're like, holy cow, here are the Beatles, these godly angels almost fighting. And it really showed this almost dark side of this dream that I think everyone had about this fantasy, the Beatles. People like to imagine what it was like, even post breakup. What would the reunions be like? So I think it was a reality that, hey, these are two people that obviously there's a love hate, just like in any strong relationship. But I found it compelling. Like I'll never forget when I first heard that. And I didn't realize it was a diss track. I think at that time it wasn't really a label, but it was. It broke through.
Yeah,
it was so direct.
So direct, so clear. If you read the lyrics, especially, and at the time we've talked about this before in a lot of different ways, but it's important to take things like this in the context of the time that it emerged.
Yeah.
In that, like you alluded to, this wasn't a thing. People didn't do this. This wasn't the way sort of people conducted their business, especially towards a person in their band, and especially in a band as iconic as the Beatles. But this was really not of its time, and I think that's why it's notable. And I'm sure, if you go deep, there might be things in blues or whatever, but this was really one of the first mainstream proper, like very clearly directed at an individual, a contemporary diss track. So I think a good place to start. But what else? What else? Where else do you want to go from here, Scott? What songs? What ideas?
Next, the one that I heard next was with the falling out of Ice Cube and NWA, especially here in the West Coast. This was huge, at least in high school. Like, whose side were you on? With Ice Cube or NWA, which had still Dr. Dre and Eazy-E at the time, and NWA. Ice Cube left the band because he felt like he wasn't getting paid fairly. And there's even the movie that has come out recently, all about the NWA story. And then NWA responded without Ice Cube on the album with a BA, like Benedict Arnold, this traitor, right? This reference to a historical figure. And then Ice Cube came back with this song with this is the most direct lyrics, called No Vaseline. I mean, think about that in 1991, no Vaseline. And you can extrapolate where that Vaseline would go. And it was just it was almost akin to like Elvis's You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog, or Positively 4th Street by Bob Dylan. This opening lyrics, like, you got a lot of nerve. This at the time, Bob Dylan, but he's singing directly about someone in an abstract way. But this reminded me of that. Like, the opening lines are just like, I'm going to do you with a broomstick with no Vaseline.
No punches pulled in any way. And and by the way, worth mentioning, I would argue that history proved Ice Cube to be correct. Not the no Vaseline part, but as someone who's in a feud, he was on the right side of that feud, right? I think he said, hey, this guy, it was kind of around Jerry Heller, who was their manager, and in royalties, and we're not getting enough. And essentially he was just like, we're getting fucked. I think all of us should do something about it. And they disagreed. They sided with their manager. He left, and then all of a sudden he's the bad guy, but ultimately they were getting fucked. And so whoever did or didn't use Vaseline, I think it's the band that stayed around that suffered the most. So an appropriate angry tirade, I would say.
Exactly. And it's a story that people followed over their decades of success. Eventually, that when Dr. Dre released his Chronic album, he was betrayed by Eazy-E and wrote diss songs called Dre Day, and it was all about Eazy-E, making fun of him literally as like this comedic character in the videos. And then Eazy-E wrote, as we mentioned, and we mentioned in our episode about feuds. So it was something, and then at the end, Ice Cube goes back with Dr. Dre. They do videos together, and so those diss songs, or that series, was a soap opera that I think that was fun to watch. Actually, fun to experience. And there's so many others, yeah.
And it does seem kind of silly now a little bit, but the lyrical content, the videos, or I think they call them Sleazy E, the fake character. But like at the time, it was like dead serious. Like this was not meant to be like, hey, let's go at each other in the press and it'll be good for both of our careers. Like it was very, very serious. And I think once the Biggie Tupac stuff happened, a lot of artists like a lot of beefs were squelched as a result of things getting a little too serious. So you had the Jay-Z Nas beef was another one where you have a song by Nas called Ether, which was so good and so devastating that that's literally a verb now. People say, like, even on Twitter, like if you have a good comeback, like, damn, that dude just got ethered. So that's pretty, that when you have a terminology that sticks in the lexicon for just absolutely destroying someone, that means you've done pretty good work on the diss track front. So
and how the detail they get into with Jay-Z's response or reply or retort with Takeover, literally giving album sales, like, hey, it's like two bankers, two bankers fighting who's got the bigger bank account. Like, look what I got, look what you got, I'm better than you. And a little bit ridiculous. I don't think it was very clever. And I think over time, I question the authenticity. It's like, hey, Seth, things are getting a little bored on D side. I'm going to throw in some diss comments about you, and we're going to have a live feud.
If you start doing a side podcast and talk shit about me, I'm going to be not pleased.
You're going to get ethered, man. D-side ethers.
I'm going to get in the booth and just light things on fire. Yeah.
So there, and then going back as you started to learn about diss songs through hip hop, it kind of led me back into some of rock songs that weren't as obvious that these were actual attacks on other people, fellow musicians. One was Neil Young did a video called "This Note's for You" and is making fun of Eric Clapton's Michelob or Bud Light promotion. And I thought, whoa, Neil Young messing with Eric Clapton. These are two like Clash of the Titans.
That's a good point. And in a really 80s music video playing, it's like basically a parody video, which is a very different than the Harvest era Neil Young. He was sort of kind of a curmudgeon-y guy. It's also that was the era we've talked about. We've had episodes about the idea of selling out. The fact that he felt like he needed to write a diss track because someone else took a corporate check. Times have changed, right? But that was absolutely like had a song and a video to go along with it that really made his personal feelings about a fellow musician very clear. So no pulling punches on that one.
That I thought we talked about Leonard Skinner dissing Neil Young. Speaking about Neil Young, and most people, I think now it's coming out as a song has just become an anthem that you hear Neil Young's name mentioned. But the one I thought was a bigger diss, and I think this is highly misunderstood, given that Leonard Skinner has a Confederate flag as their symbol, was a diss against the former governor Wallace in Alabama, where it says, down in Birmingham, they love the governor. Boo hoo. Yep. We all did what we could do. And Ronnie Van Sant says, hey, I don't like how he treats colored people. That's the quote he used. Okay. And even in the song Saturday Night Special, he goes after guns, right? Leonard Skinner says
very early anti-gun, a man ahead of his time. Ronnie
I was going to say, like, everyone, like, here's a guy, Leonard Skinner with a Confederate flag is speaking for African-American rights and anti-guns. Like, there you go. All right. The most woke group ever from Jacksonville.
Also, funny enough, Ronnie Van Zant's brother, the lead singer of fellow Southern rock band 38 Special, a band named after a gun. So,
love it.
I love it.
But you have like Sex Pistols wrote a song against a corporation, EMI, who they absolutely hated. And the song's just called EMI.
I was gonna say, let's make it clear. It's not a song about EMI that's coded. The song's literally called EMI.
Yeah.
So yeah, at a time where it was very rock and roll to be anti-corporate. And by the way, the Sex Pistols were kind of a pulled together band that made a lot of money. So it's they're not as punk rock as maybe they get. Aesthetically, yes, but business wise, they're not exactly what they always present themselves as. So it's even funnier that they have this song. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that the drama that they bring out is much different than it is today. For example, Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson. Nine Inch Nails actually was the mentor of Marilyn Manson. And apparently Marilyn got away into the scene, hanging out in LA, basically doing a Metallica version of like, we were against all these establishment and all these pretty people, and now I'm one of them. And Nine Inch Nails called it out with the song "Starfucker."
Yeah, and now fuck the establishment. But by the way, now I'm dating Rose McGowan.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Like, hey man, I want my caviar. Like, yeah, I know, bring it. So, and then they had this conciliation on stage, and it was this hugging moment. And so at first you're like, is this real, or is this just another way to get attention? And that's what I think now, as you mentioned, fighting and you see this from news, conflict breeds viewership. So I can imagine PRs are like, hey, Sen Scott, your viewership's getting kind of stagnant. We need some conflict. Just like they do in any reality show or any novel, you have to have conflict. So some part of me is like, what's real and what isn't in these diss songs?
And I'm just thinking about this. I wouldn't say obviously that that music invented the public conflict between two known figures.
Yeah.
But like, it's so central to so much pop culture now, especially when you're talking about reality TV, etc. Where like that entire universe is built on who's feuding with who's being public about it, how are they getting back at the other person. So it's like there's an entire industry built around the idea of diss tracks or our modern day equivalent of them. But you know, to put it down in music and make it part of your album was a pretty radical statement back, you know, even 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's where John Lennon really was innovative, if you will, that he had enough clout with the record label. He said, hey, I'm going to release this track. Where probably years before they'd be like, no. The news will talk about it. The Daily News will, but you don't mention your personal beef or your personal complaints against this person that you mention in the song. And now I think it's part of just your general PR strategy. Okay, who's your enemy? We need a rival. Okay, Taylor Swift, who are you going to be fighting? We need some headlines. And that's where I think it's lost its punch, as you alluded to. Like the diss song is like, it's just like you have to have a diss song.
people are much more inclined to see through it now because it's such a common method to get attention for both parties, right? So it's like it feels like it has less credibility as a mechanism to like shit on somebody. But
I think it shows that they're very. One thing I've learned with D-side stories and talking with artists and whatnot is they're hyper competitive. And hypercritical of each other, like worse than any CEOs or businesses. Usually when you said we were back in our corporate days, we'd say, you need to respect the competitor. You never talk bad about the competitor. It shows low taste. But with artists, even if they go on after, or even comedians or whatever, they're like, oh, dude, I hate his act, or I hate. It's so personal that you can almost understand why there's this anger towards this person. Right, I mentioned in a couple episodes ago, Steely Dan writing a diss song about John Lennon's "Imagine."
Wild move, yeah.
The song.
But they were pretty eccentric, or however you want to say.
Yeah, they hated everyone, right? And everyone hated Steely Dan. But literally, what I think, as I mentioned, in 1971, Imagine was on the charts everywhere, and Steely Dan thought it was ridiculous that this rich English guy in a Rolls Royce is saying the world should be as one. They write a song called "Only a Fool Would Say That."
Yeah.
And worse, Paul McCartney loves Steely Dan, right? You're like, what? Did he like it because they're bagging on his buddy John?
You can see the party lines being formed before your eyes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's an interesting, actually, that just made me think of something, Scott, like this idea of punching up, right? Versus punching down.
Yeah.
And it's, I think in hindsight, Steely Dan is hugely famous and is, has a following and has sold a gazillion records. But at the time, and that, when Imagine was out, like,
Oh yeah,
they were a little more what we would call underground today, right? They had a following, they were popular, but they also were not quite as mainstream as John Lennon, obviously. So there's something to benefit from when you're punching up, because if you even get the attention of someone like a John Lennon, then that works in your favor, because suddenly people are equating you together. And so if there is some strategy to be called out for those types of things, the idea of punching up is not the worst career move, I think history has shown, right?
No, not at all. So I mean, what are we going to say about Joe Rogan? I mean, what's going to be our
Well, he's a great example. I mean, he's a guy who, like, he's a great person to start a feud with, because he's got so many followers that if he's punching back, punching down at you, that's good for your, any press is good press. That's good for business.
He validates. So we just need to do the equivalent of a no Vaseline.
There you go. I'm ready to go scorched earth on Joe Rogan.
Let's go head
and
to
the
head.
Joe Rogan experience. Yeah.
One that I found in the research that I didn't anticipate was Randy Newman's 1983 song, My Life is Good. I don't know if you heard about this one, Seth, but he wrote it to kind of satire Bruce Springsteen as this. Everyone knows Bruce Springsteen is this kind of has this blue collar persona. The dude's ultra wealthy, right?
Yes.
Almost an aristocrat, and wrote this song about meeting this blue collar hero, but really this very wealthy guy. And I guess Bruce actually liked the song. I think he took a very good attitude towards it. But you can imagine, like, hey man,
Bruce is not here for the beef. Bruce is not here. He's he's a go with the flow guy. This came out in 83, which is a year before Born in the USA. So he's about to get a lot more rich and famous, kind of off of his blue collar mechanic vibe. But I mean, Randy Newman sort of famously tweaks everybody. I mean, he writes in satire. His songs are more like stories than traditional songs. I mean, he's sort of a poet more before he's a songwriter. Doesn't surprise me that he took umbrage to someone like Springsteen, or someone he perceived to be not as they present themselves. He was a pretty down to earth, pretty like, session player as much as he was his own albums, never super famous. I think it's hard to remember how not famous Randy Newman was before, like, Toy Story. Now everybody kind of knows him for his movie scores, but he was very much sort of the working class version of a musician in the 70s and 80s. And so to take offense to Springsteen's presentation of working class is actually not that surprising. And he also, I think, over his career proves that he doesn't really give a fuck. So it's not the first time he's written lyrics to kind of tweak people, but this one is very, very specific in this time around.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this is part of his thing. He makes fun of social situations, almost like a Saturday Night Live, like satire. He's a satirist. And
commentary, exactly.
And totally. I think that's just part of it. So everyone's free game, and I think probably Bruce realized that. It was a very kind of intelligent way, and I think that was a smart move by the boss to
just stay out of that one.
Just to go, I'm not touching that. Okay, everyone, let's move on. But one that I would say that it's not necessarily a diss song, but I got to mention it because it's very bizarre. Was between John Bonham and Karen Carpenter. Back in the
drum off. Let's do it.
They had the drummers poll, and John Bonham since 1969 would rank number one consistently. He was just the default best drummer ever. And in the late 70s, as Led Zeppelin was waning, Karen Carpenter got ranked number one, and apparently John Bonham just flipped out, just lost his shit, and was just saying, like, she can't do anything. I can't believe this. And Karen wrote back to John personally, or I think through an article, and said, like, I'm very sorry, Mr. Bonham, that I didn't vote. That was an external poll. I hope I didn't upset you. But one thing that John said is she can't play any Led Zeppelin song, but what she did is played one of his songs just to show very passive aggressive, like, yeah, I'm also, because Karen Carter, just to tell you, not only
She's
was
a good
she
drummer.
an angelic voice, right, from
Yeah.
Downey, California, but it just a pretty accomplished drummer.
Yeah.
So,
She was no, I mean,
yeah,
Meg White catches a lot of shit, and maybe rightfully so from the White Stripes. But Karen Carpenter was actually a good drummer, and there's
oh
footage
yeah,
out there for drumming. Was she better than John Bonham?
yeah,
Of course not. But this almost reminds me of an episode we talked about. The idea of what you remember as being popular versus what was actually popular. Where it's like
yeah,
the biggest song of like '74 or whatever was
yeah,
like "Tie a Yellow Ribbon Around the Old Oak
yeah,
Tree."
yeah,
So you got to the externalities of a poll like that have to be considered.
yeah,
Obviously, she's not a better drummer than John Bonham, but
yeah,
it makes for a funny story.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
definitely the funniest beef you could have come up with for
I
sure.
think that I think a drum off would have been badass.
I
Dude.
would have watched it.
Moby
I would
Dick,
have.
Moby Dick. There you go. Well, well, Seth, let me as we wind up here, what battle, what diss song would you like to see happen between two artists
Of
in a
current
write
day,
off?
I mean,
No,
I'm
it
trying.
is in the history of music.
I guess I don't know if they've ever done a proper diss track. They've certainly gone back and forth plenty, but I would like to see a full album of diss tracks by the Gallagher brothers. That's what I would like. There's enough vitriol, there's enough behind the scenes stories I want written into a diss track. That would be the one. They take barbs at each other. I don't
Yeah.
remember any specific song references, so if you're listening, Gallagher brothers, please get on that. Do your boy a favor and write that one up. How about you, Scott?
Okay. Listen, I'm going to step into an imaginary. Well, part imagine. Yeah, it's all imagination. Um, you had actually referenced this when we first started, but going back to classical music, I think symphonies, if you could do a Mozart versus Beethoven, who's the king, and some way they could do a symphony off or like a diss track, like maybe uh Mozart didn't like Beethoven's use of like choral, right? Of chorus. And so he would mock him or something, some way that you could intelligently show in the symphony, right? His eighth was actually a diss track against Mozart. That's
I
one.
would also love to see the audience listening to it where they're playing it. It comes up and like in the middle of the performance, people are like, "Oh!"
Yeah, Mike,
like they get the reference. Yeah.
like the whatever when you're conducting, he drops it and goes, "That's right, bitch. There you go,
Yes.
man. I did a full on like, well, I don't know what you would call it, like 10
Baton
drum
drop.
rolls." Yeah.
Yeah.
The other one is actually these are videos on YouTube, and I guarantee you got to watch them. There are these like uh battle royales, and one they had was Skrillex versus Mozart,
Oh,
and they
Mozart.
had,
I remember this. I remember this guy doing these
yeah,
like rap battles through
yeah,
history or
yeah,
something.
they
This
would
is
do
an old
that.
one,
They
but
would do
yeah.
them on painting, like Picasso versus Bob Ross, and
Yeah.
they have these rap battles, but they take, I don't know what you call it when it's out of anachronistic, whatever the term is.
Anachronistic.
Anachronistic, yeah. So you have
Yeah.
Skrillex versus Mozart. But as a fan of classical music, I do know there were a lot. It's a competitive space. So you had certain composers that didn't want to go to certain cities because that guy was too competitive, and they wanted the whole crowd. So even back then, you get a sense that there was indirect dissing through different policies and whatnot. So I thought that would be quite entertaining.
Oh, absolutely. I would be there for it.
But anyway, so I think for us, we got to prepare our no Vaseline episode versus Mr. Rogan.
I'm ready. I'm ready to get in the booth and just absolutely rip fire flames at him. So
What would be today's? If it's no Vaseline, what would be today's version?
I don't know, maybe like making fun of his podcast studio or something, or like making your microphones are shitty. I don't know.
Yeah,
We got to think
yeah,
about this a
yeah.
little
We
bit.
got to we'll go get in the lab and do that. But
Yeah.
everyone, listen, go out, find your best diss track, tell us about it. We want to hear it, and encourage everyone to go listen to Karen Carpenter drumming. I think you'll be quite impressed.
Go watch her on YouTube and just feel the hatred running through your veins for John Bonham.
That's right, Led Zeppelin. See you, everyone. Have a good weekend.
All right, thanks.